afternoon. Please take your seats. Take your seats, please. I call the meeting of General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions to order. This session of the committee will close at 4 p.m. I propose that the draft agenda be adopted with one change. We consider amendments for the draft resolution and then the supplementary items. If anyone have objections? No objections? No? Okay, thank you. The agenda is adopted. And now I begin with Amendment 37. I call Mr. Dolidze from Georgia to propose Amendment 37.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The main reason of our initiative on this amendment is not only for Georgia, but for other OSCE countries, I think, the people who are suffering much, IDPs and refugees after the ethnic cleansing. We have, starting from the Budapest OSCE summit document from 1994, then Lisbon document in 1996, and Istanbul from 1999, and others, which clearly underlines ethnic cleansing and then necessity of taking care for these people. I think that we also, as a parliamentary assembly, should address this problem, and that's why we decided to propose this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against? No? Mr. Walsh, your opinion?
Yeah, we're in favour of the amendment as outlined here. There has been, I think, it was mentioned in a press release some 2 or 3 years ago about South Ossetia, where there was de facto ethnic cleansing, and where refugees have their homes and wish to go back. And of course, in the Middle East, the Palestinian cause certainly falls into that category as well. So glad to support the amendment.
Now I put the amendment to the vote. Votes in favour? Votes against? Abstentions? The amendment is adopted. Amendment 38. I call Mr. Dolidze of Georgia to propose the amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, it's me again. I see that the last days all chairs are Madam Chairs, and we have to keep somehow this gender balance, and that's why I am proposing the importance and encouraging gender balanced policy in OSCE area. This is a joke, of course, but actually we think and we do believe that it will be, it should be actually the separate para on this very issue. We in Georgia are considering very seriously. We even established the State Commission on this particular issue, and we're going to continue to fulfillment our commitments in this field. So we propose this and asking for support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does anyone wish to speak against this amendment? No? Mr. Walsh, please.
Well, again, I find myself in agreement with Mr. Dolidze. The OSCE is certainly in favour of equal opportunities for women and men, so I'm happy to agree and concur with your amendment.
I put Amendment 38 to the vote. Votes in favor? Against? Abstentions? The amendment 38 is adopted.
Komic will speak on Amendment 39 instead of Gross. It'll be Komic from Serbia.
Okay. I call now Ms. Komic from Serbia to propose Amendment 39.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, President Grosruk has asked me as one of the co-signers of the amendment to introduce it on his behalf, and I'm glad he did because it gives me an opportunity to underline our strong commitment to the OSCE work in the field of human rights and democratic development. While we are all aware of the importance of the other two dimensions, as parliamentarians who take up the daily concerns of our citizens, we see with great concern that the concrete implementation of the many commitments participating states have undertaken in the field of fundamental freedoms is still lagging behind. In my political work, I have always been focused on strengthening parliamentary oversight, aiming at furthering the democratic development in my country and in the region and elsewhere. Our ultimate goal should be to enhance the general respect of governments for human rights, the implementation of the rule of law, and the development of a climate of tolerance and non-discrimination. The main institution in this endeavor on the governmental side is the ODIHR, whose primary task is to assist participating states in the implementation of these fundamental rights. Unfortunately, as President Migliori said last year in Warsaw, much more needs to be done. In order to achieve this aim, the ODIHR needs sufficient funding in times of lesser readiness on the side of donors to provide the ODIHR with extra budgetary funds. This can only be done by an increase in the budgetary means put at its disposal. This is what the amendment calls for, and I would like to add that after all the discussions we had about PA-ODIHR cooperation in election observation, the approval of this amendment by a strong majority in this hall would send out a clear signal of our support for these institutions. And for my personal capacity, if we continue to talk about transparency and accountability and do power and money, people will be even far, far away from us than it is the case now. It's election time. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against? No? Mr. Walsh, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's noteworthy that funding and supports are often opposed at the Permanent Council in Vienna by certain states. And if we're to realise our potential, resources are absolutely essential for this body to be effective and achieve our goals and objectives, and for that reason I'm in favour of the amendment.
I put Amendment 39 to the vote. Votes in favour? Against? Abstentions? The amendment is adopted. Amendment 40, and I call now Mr. Senko of Belarus to propose Amendment 40.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Изначально, предлагая эту поправку, мы исходили из того, что право на справедливый суд, как и свобода выражения, являются универсальными, они распространяются на всех вне зависимости от рода деятельности и никого не выделяя. Вместе с тем мы готовы не настаивать на принятии данной поправки. Спасибо.
Does anyone wish to speak against? Cordana, you have the floor.
I'm against the amendment because it erases journalists, bloggers, and civil society, and actually it erases or tries to delete what is a platform of communications of nowadays of our civilization. That's social media. People want to talk, want to be heard, and people want to come to social media, being a blogger or a Twitter or whatever, to be heard and listen. And I think it's important for OSCE to support such communication. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, your opinion?
Yes, well, I think that the comment made by Mr. Senko is correct. Rights are universal, but I think it's important to specify these groups because oftentimes they're the targets of repression, and therefore I think it's useful to actually have them mentioned. So for that reason, I'm against amending paragraph 21.
I put now the amendment 40 to the vote.
Один момент, пожалуйста, опять по существу, по видению. Я предложил снять эту поправку, не выставлять ее на голосование. Почему-то второй раз меня не понимают.
Okay. Okay, it's drawn. Okay. Very well. And now amendment 41, and I call Mr. Dubs of United Kingdom to propose amendment 41. He will speak for 30 seconds, and then Mr. Smith will speak for 30 seconds also. Okay?
Thank you. I shall be quick. The OSCE can set a very powerful example, not only to the two countries that I've mentioned in the resolution, but to the wider world. We know that the death penalty does not deter. Innocent people may be executed, that many, many countries in the world are against it, and even in the United States, most recently, the state of Maryland passed a vote against the death penalty. So I think it's important that we make a clear statement here today. It would be helpful to a very important matter of human rights.
Madam Chair, I just want to make very clear that I support the Dubs resolution. I would note that Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and President Obama all support the death penalty. But I've been in Congress now 33 years. I believe it is a violation of fundamental human rights. We need to abolish it, and the sooner the better. So I join in support of the Lord Dubs resolution.
Does anyone wish to speak against? No one? Mr. Walsh, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must say I concur with the sentiments expressed by Lord Dubs and also by Congressman Chris Smith. To me, human life is inviolate from conception to natural death. And sometimes there's inconsistencies, and I discussed this with Lord Dubs yesterday, in the thinking in that regard. And I very much welcome the comments made by Congressman Chris Smith. I think it's courageous and it's correct. So I'm very happy to support this amendment.
I put amendment 41 to the vote. Votes in favor? Against? Abstentions? The amendment 41 is adopted. Amendment 42, and I call Mr. Holm for Sweden to propose this amendment.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, and let me first do what many others have already done, say a big thank you to Mrs. Phelan for a great report and a great resolution, I think. And I do regret that we, in the Standing Committee, took away some of the interesting and important discussions, such as the one from proposed by our German colleague about Kazakhstan. But in this specific case, I am concerned about the situation and the development in Ukraine, especially when it comes to the rule of law and democratic development and corruption issues, and also a lot of other issues. But in this specific case, we call on to respect international standards for judicial independence and transparency and justice and so on. We have the clear case on Yulia Tymoshenko, and I think it is very important that we state that in this arena. And we need to, even to avoid the perception that the judicial processes are politically motivated. But here we also have quite clear evidence. We have human rights decisions about it, that there has been politically motivated sentences, and I think that is something we need to clearly mark against, and therefore I hope that you support my amendment.
I have discretion of Ukraine to speak against.
Спасибо большое, коллеги. Я от украинской делегации хочу выразить свою признательность, во-первых, автору резолюции за столь актуальную, взвешенную и объединительную позицию. Но вместе с тем хотела бы предостеречь и господина Волша, и наших коллег от поправки 42, которая фактически лишает данную резолюцию объективности и снизит ее ценность. Более того, она сделает для некоторых политиканов данный документ как инструментарий для дезинформации мирового сообщества. Поясню почему. Внимательно ознакомьтесь еще раз с 42-й поправкой. Ее инициаторы, видимо, дезинформированы, поскольку они ссылаются на решение Европейского суда по правам человека, в котором такие оценки, как политические преследования, мотивация виновно-невиновна, в принципе отсутствуют. Более того, решение Европейского суда по правам человека дает всего лишь оценку устаревшим процедурным нормам Уголовно-процессуального кодекса Украины. С того момента, когда так называемое дело Тимошенко разбиралось в суде, Украина совершила огромный рывок. Мы приняли новый уголовно-процессуальный кодекс, который на нынешний момент получил очень высокие оценки европейских специалистов, Венецианской комиссии в том числе. Мы бы хотели указать на опасность, что вот такие претенциозные поправки, политизирующие целую резолюцию, они опасны. Да, хорошо. Они опасны тем, что могут инфицировать политическое мировое пространство, когда высокопоставленные политики, рядясь в политические одежды, хотели бы избежать наказания за свои проступки и правонарушения. Поэтому прошу от имени Украины данную поправку, которая просто дезинформирует общество, не поддерживать. Спасибо.
Умничка.
Does anyone wish to Ukraine speak? Mr. Walsh, it's your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I note that the Ukrainian delegate drew attention to the European Court of Human Rights. Now, while the judgment is not final, they did unanimously hold that there was a violation of Article 5.1, which is the right to liberty and security, violation of Article 5.4, right to a speedy review of the lawfulness of detention, and a violation of Article 5.5, right to compensation for unlawful detention. But also, EU Resolution 2012 stated that there should be an unconditional immediate release of all prisoners sentenced on politically motivated grounds, including leaders of the opposition. So I think if we're to be consistent, I would have to recommend that we vote in favour of the Swedish amendment here.
I put the amendment to the vote. Vote in favour. Please raise your cards. Against? Abstentions?
They want to count. That's okay. We will count.
Do you want? Okay, no problem. We repeat. Please vote in favour. Raise your cards. The number? 32 votes in favor. Now, against? Raise your cards.
We have 9. Let's see what they have.
The number there? 9 votes against. Abstentions? Six abstentions. The amendment 42 is adopted. Amendment 43, I call Mr. Dubs of United Kingdom to present the amendment.
Thank you very much. This is the first of two amendments concerned with Interpol. Now, Interpol ought to be a body that helps to bring criminals internationally to justice. Unfortunately, as this amendment says, some countries are using Interpol to pursue people on politically motivated charges. I've mentioned some of the people concerned in the amendment, but unfortunately there are others as well. I could mention Kazakhstan, where they've actually got from the Italian authorities, they've got back the family of Mr. Ablyazov, his wife and children, who are now held in prison. And it seems to me that Interpol ought to be very careful, and I'll come on to that in the next resolution. But at the moment, what we ought to do is to make it clear that countries should never use Interpol to pursue people on what we would generally call politically motivated charges.
Does anyone wish to speak against Ukraine? You have the floor.
Уважаемая госпожа председатель, я хотел бы спросить уважаемую коллегу, который внес эту поправку, какие у нее есть документы, которые свидетельствуют, что и Россия, и Беларусь, и Украина злоупотребляют Интерполом. Мы не влияем на Интерпол, это не наша международная какая-то организация. Тем более, если есть документы, покажите, пожалуйста, что такое злоупотребление. Но следующее, вы говорите, что гонение по политическим мотивам. Здесь называется фамилия Богдана Данилишина. Богдан Данилишин никогда не был ни в какой политической партии, он работал в министерстве. И когда ему стали предъявлять требования по злоупотреблению должностной должности своей, должностным преступлением обвинили, он моментально уехал в одну из стран, и ему дали политическое убежище. Он даже сам заявлял о том, что он никогда не занимался политикой, поэтому никаких преследований у нас по политическим мотивам этого человека нет, тем более нельзя говорить, что мы каким-то образом влияем на Интерпол. Я прошу, или пусть наш коллега даст аргументацию, а не просто политическое заявление, или прошу не голосовать за эту поправку. Благодарю вас.
The rule is one opinion, the proposer, the sponsor of the amendment, and one person who speaks against. We don't have a dialogue here. And now the opinion of the rapporteur.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it has to be recognized that a good point has been raised in that Interpol doesn't have any effective mechanisms for preventing countries or indeed individuals from abusing the mechanisms. And in fact, if you're a person who finds themselves in that position, your only option is to request a review, and the reviewing commission, funded by Interpol and serviced by Interpol, you don't have any right to a hearing at that commission. You have no opportunity to respond to allegations against you, and you'll be given no reason for the decision reached. So I think it's a very important point that's raised, and I think there's a need for, and maybe we'll come to in a few minutes, maybe for the Interpol situation to be looked at differently. One of the cases has engaged me because I've taken a particular interest, as I indicated earlier, in the Sergei Magnitsky case. And Mr. William Browder, who appeared before our Foreign Affairs Committee, gave us an outline of the background to that particular case. And apart from the appalling death of Mr. Magnitsky, Mr. Browder himself, in fact, in 2005, was stopped at Moscow airport and deported. And subsequently, Interpol has been used with an arrest warrant being issued. That followed on the decision of the American authorities to introduce the Magnitsky Act, to which the Russians responded in relation to the prohibition on adoption by Americans. And I would think there's probably very significant circumstantial grounds there for supporting the amendment, and I'm going to vote in favour of the amendment for the reasons that I've outlined.
Okay. No, we don't have dialogue. You understand? It's the rule, and we must.
Я прошу с процедуры дать мне слово. Александр Стоян, Украина. Я все-таки хотел бы, чтобы были аргументы
You don't have the floor,
на пользу
please.
поправки.
You don't have the floor. You use your time, and it's finished. Please. I put the amendment 43 to vote. Please vote in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. The amendment is adopted. Amendment 44. I call Mr. Dobbs of the United Kingdom to propose Amendment 44.
Thank you. I've listened to the previous debate, and I would simply say this, particularly to our colleagues from the Ukraine. If actually you believe that there are no people on politically motivated charges, then you could vote for Amendment 44 with a clear conscience, and I hope you will do that. I think there is a problem with Interpol, and I hope a message will come out from the OSCE to Interpol to say that there ought to be better procedures. They are not supposed to be involved in activities of a political, military, religious or racial character, and they should be held to that. And I think all is not well with Interpol, and I think passing this resolution will actually say something to Interpol in the hope that they will mend their ways.
Does anyone wish to speak against this amendment? Kazakhstan, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, with regards to the Amendment 43, there was misinformation. Mr. Dobbs, UK.
Now we are discussing
I asked
44.
twice and you didn't give me the word.
No, because the rule is one person to propose the amendment and one person to speak against. It's the rule.
Point of order, not...
And now we are discussing 44.
And what about me? I asked twice, you didn't give me the word.
And I don't give because...
Point of order.
Because you don't do a point of order, and the rule is one person to propose, one person to speak against.
If there is disinformation,
the rule, no more than one person. Sorry, it's the rule. Did anyone want to speak against 44? No? Mr. Walsh, your opinion about Amendment 44?
Yeah, well, I think Interpol itself doesn't make arrests. I think it's a coordinating body for other police forces in, I think it's something like 180, 190 countries. But it's not accountable to anybody, and its procedures are opaque. And for reasons that I outlined earlier, which I think have been amplified by Lord Dobbs, I think there is real need for the defects to be addressed to ensure that there cannot be abuses. And I'm sure everybody here who's in favour of human rights would not want to see any abuses made in any part of the world in this regard.
Now I put Amendment 44 to vote. Please vote in favour. Votes against? Abstentions? The amendment is adopted. Amendment 45. I call Ms. Sederfeld from Sweden to propose the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All citizens must have the right to use internet freely and be able to trust it. The information has to be reliable, with no criminal activities and no incitements to criminal activities. Standards must be set by the authorities, but normal principle for the fundamental freedom has to be used. There are several very tricky technical issues yet to be solved, but the free internet is fundamental for free communication and information without restriction in the OSCE area. The key issue is the international dimension. It is not enough that the minority of the countries in the world are working for fundamental freedoms on internet. The internet is offering unknown opportunities to strengthen the free speech, but we have a long way to go. In that perspective, the OSCE and other international organizations have an important part to play and a big responsibility. I want to pay a tribute to the Special Representative on Freedom on the Media, Dunja Miljatovic, and ask all delegates to support her important work. For this reason, I ask for support to my amendments for the third committee resolution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did anyone wish to speak against? No? Mr. Walsh, your opinion?
Thank you. Yes, I'm in favour of the amendment which is put. I think it's important, as has been pointed out, the internet is a great source of knowledge, education, information, and I think is a force for good and can be a force for good. But I also agree with Ms. Sederfeld in the caveat that she placed on it, that it must be legal and it must be, the standards must be met, because we have seen, use particularly in the areas of child pornography, grooming of children for sexual acts, and indeed we've also seen cyber attacks being made. So there obviously must be certain standards that have to be policed and controlled. But with that caveat, certainly I'm very happy to support the amendment.
Thank you. I put the amendment 45 to vote. Votes in favor, please raise your cards. Votes against? Abstentions? The amendment is adopted. I call now again Ms. Sederfeld of Sweden to propose amendment 46.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will start with that. I can underline the difficulties the Kurdish minority is suffering, which I have noticed all by myself when I observed the parliamentary election in Turkey 2011 in Diyarbakir. The ethnic Kurdish minority is composing 20% of the population in Turkey, but we must not forget all the other minorities in Turkey. There are actually in total 22 ethnic minorities among them, and I can mention 1 million of Armenians, 1 million of Georgians, 700,000 Roma, and 500,000 of Kyrgyz population. For this reason, I can urge you all to support my amendment in paragraph 11 in the supplementary item on the Kurds in Turkey. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now Mr. Akba from Turkey wants to speak
Teşekkür
against.
ediyorum Sayın Başkan. Türkiye'ye spesifik atıf yapılan bu değişiklik önerisi beni şaşırttığını ve hayal kırıklığına uğrattığını ifade etmek istiyorum. Azınlık hakları elbette önemlidir ancak bu Agit coğrafyasındaki ülkelerin tamamı için geçerlidir. Diğer ülkelerdeki azınlık haklarını göz ardı eden bu öneriye itiraz ediyoruz. Türkiye'nin insan hakları politikası herkes için ayrım gözetmeksizin insan hakları şeklinde özetlenebilir. Ülkemizin anayasal sistemi bireylerin din, ırk, renk, etnik köken, dil ve benzeri özelliklerine bakılmaksızın yasa önünde eşitliğine dayanır. Ülkemizde ayrımcılık yapmak kanunen yasaktır ve suçtur. Bu konudaki mevzuatımız titizlikle uygulanmaktadır. Ülkemizdeki dini azınlıkların haklarına ilişkin mevzuat ve uygulamalarımız da düzenli olarak gözden geçirilmekte ve iyileştirilmektedir. Son olarak azınlık vakıflarına ait mülklerin ve varlıkların iadesine ilişkin düzenlemeler de hayata geçirilmiştir. Türkiye'nin ayrımcılığa karşı kararlı politikası küresel düzeyde Birleşmiş Milletler, bölgesel düzeyde ise Avrupa Konseyi ve AGİT gibi üyesi bulunduğumuz örgütler çerçevesinde taraf olduğumuz uluslararası sözleşme ve denetim mekanizmaları ile yapıcı işbirliğimizde yansımasını bulmaktadır. Bu değişiklik önergesine itiraz ediyoruz. Teşekkür ediyorum Sayın Başkan.
Mr. Walsh, your opinion, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'm a little conflicted with the amendment, but I'm inclined to vote in favour for this reason. I think it's important that we recognise that Turkey is moving to drafting a new constitution which will be based more on civilian structure rather than the military structure which was there. I went to Taksim Square yesterday evening to observe the protests that were taking place there in a peaceful way actually, but there was a very high level of policing which I thought was maybe not commensurate with the numbers who were involved in the protesting. I would also like to acknowledge that Turkey is one of the very few countries in the region where religious freedom is respected, Jordan being another. But there are many countries across this region where Christians in particular have been certainly persecuted and extremely badly treated. They've been hemorrhaging from the area. And I think it's absolutely important that Turkey maintains its pluralist approach to these issues and that it doesn't go in the direction of fundamentalism, which many other states in the region have gone. And that's something that we would not like to see happening. So I would be encouraging Turkey to continue on the road it's going and perhaps to take this amendment in the spirit in which it's intended. It's a cautionary signal that perhaps recent events and maybe recent trends, however small, might well be moving in the wrong direction in Turkey. But I would like to say, and I think everybody will agree with me here, you've been absolutely tremendous hosts since we arrived here. I think the hospitality and the friendship certainly is something that would be on a parallel with the best we've got in any other country that we visited.
And now I put the amendment 46 to the vote. Please vote in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. The amendment is adopted. Amendment 47, I call Mr. Senko of Belarus to propose the amendment.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Как известно, мандаты полевых миссий разрабатываются совместно с принимающими государствами, и их стандартная длительность мандатов составляет, как правило, 1 год. Но что происходит потом? На практике же ОБСЕ стремится далее придать им характер бессрочно действующих полевых операций ОБСЕ и с широкими, размытыми мандатами. На наш взгляд, сегодня важно не подрывать тот хрупкий консенсус, который существует по вопросу мандатов миссий. А в перспективе, по нашему мнению, стоило бы подумать над поиском новых, более гибких и ориентированных на конкретные потребности государств-участников ОБСЕ формы сотрудничества и проектного взаимодействия. А также можно подумать над возможным расширением географии полевой и проектной деятельности ОБСЕ. Это может оказаться полезным не только для стран с молодой демократией. Спасибо. Поэтому предлагаем пункт 24 удалить, заменив его новым текстом поправкой 49. Спасибо.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against? No one? Your opinion, Mr. Walsh?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we should note that the Monaco Declaration just last year said that it urges the OSCE Ministerial Council to adopt full, effective and long-term, at least 3-year mandates for OSCE field missions. I think it's important that we would maintain that position, and for that reason I'd be against the amendment and in favour of retaining the paragraph that my colleague Deputy Anne Phelan has included in her draft resolutions.
I put now the amendment to the vote. Please, attention, votes in favour. Votes against. Abstentions. Okay. The amendment is defeated. I call now Mr. Holm of Sweden to propose amendment 48.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. And this is also an important task, I think. Well, since the Rose Revolution in 2003, we have seen good both democratic and economic development in the state of Georgia. And we saw last year's election, which was a free and fair election, and the ruling majority by then lost the election. They resigned peacefully, and a new government came in, which I think is how it should work. Losing sides should resign and be opposition. And we are, though, concerned about the large number of former politicians and former state officials being arrested, and want to stress our concern here, as it is worrying. And just the thing that we suspect that there might be politically motivated sentences and pre-trials. I'm not urging for immediate release, but for following the rule of law and not having politically motivated sentences. So therefore, because among all this, there is a former prime minister, but there are also many others. So therefore, I put forward this amendment, and I hope that you will support it. Thank you.
Does anyone want to speak against Georgia? Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate distinguished colleague Holm from Sweden for the attention toward my country, situation describing after the Rose Revolution and now. I fully agree with him that any political motivated selective justice should not be, at the OSCE area, no doubt about that. And as you remember, distinguished Mr. Holm, yesterday I fully supported presented by my opponent colleague from Georgian Parliament, Tsereteli, amendment number 8, which emphasized that there should not be any political prisoners, retribution on political opponents, or selective justice in the OSCE area, including Georgia, of course. So I can assure you that there is no any more selective justice in Georgia, but on another hand, no man is above the law. This is the most important. Distinguished colleagues, you know that OSCE trial mission, which is monitoring the situation and judicial reformation in Georgia, is on the ground. The most, I would say, prominent man in terms of public defense, Mr. Hammerberg, is on the ground and monitoring the situation. There is no verdict
You
still.
must finish, please.
And I would ask you to seriously take that and not to support such an amendment.
Conclude.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone, you speak against, Mr. Walsh, your opinion?
Yes, well, I think we've been impressed with the progress that Georgia has been making, but I think there's still, I think you'd agree, a little bit more of the road to travel. I think the motion or the amendment is really expressing concern. I think you've responded to it, but nonetheless, I think it's appropriate for the OSCE, particularly where there's any element or risk of political prisoners. And I heard what you had to say in response to that. So for that reason, I'm inclined to go in favor of the Swedish amendment.
Okay, I put the amendment 48 to the vote. Please take your seats. We are voting now. Votes in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. The amendment is adopted. Amendment 49, Mr. Senko, to propose the amendment.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Как уважаемые коллеги, известно, что мандаты многих полевых миссий ОБСЕ были утверждены почти 20 лет назад. За это время ситуация в странах, где открывались миссии, существенно изменилась. Некоторые элементы мандатов миссий устарели, у стран появились новые потребности, новые приоритеты. При этом у них уже сформированы дееспособные национальные институты, которые могли бы эффективно выполнять соответствующие функции. Однако сегодня мы довольно часто видим, как предложения принимающих государств поставить вопрос о выходе на новый уровень и новые формы сотрудничества с ОБСЕ наталкиваются на стену непонимания и даже прямое противодействие. В этой ситуации считаем логичным было бы спокойно сесть и оценить мандаты действующих миссий на предмет их реализации, как это, собственно, и предусмотрено в Стамбульской хартии. Ведь миссии не являются застывшими институтами. Они должны, как прописано в хартии, оказывать содействие странам в развитии их собственного потенциала, а также в накоплении и передаче им соответствующих знаний и опыта. Этот момент также стоит учитывать, помня о том, что сегодня все чаще звучит тезис, что для повышения эффективности работы на наиболее важных направлениях у ОБСЕ нет свободных средств, в то время как на миссии уходит почти 70% из ее почти 160 миллионов бюджета. Просим поддержать данный пункт. Спасибо.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against? No one. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the concept, obviously, of analysing, reviewing and improving our operations, even in the field area, is something that should be an ongoing process. But I just have a little concern that anything which could inhibit our field presence in a situation where I think most of us would want to see an expansion of our activities in that area, it's a very fundamental core activity of the organisation, would cause some concern, and for that reason I'll be voting against this amendment.
Now I put Amendment 49 to the vote. Please vote against, votes in favor. Votes against. Abstentions? Okay, the amendment is defeated. And I call again Mr. Senko of Belarus to propose amendment 50.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Я доволен тем, что мои interventions подходят к концу. Думаю, что кое-кто из коллег то же самое. Мандат офиса ОБСЕ в Минске мы считаем выполненным. В настоящее время мы ведем консультации по возможному прямому проектному взаимодействию с исполнительными структурами организаций. И в данный момент мы не видим никаких оснований для учреждения в нашей стране нового постоянного присутствия ОБСЕ. Спасибо.
I must do a note. If this amendment is adopted, the amendment 51 is preempted. Okay? And now, Estonia wants to speak again?
No excuse.
No? Okay. Does anyone wish to speak against? No? Mr. Walsh, your opinion?
Yes, well, just to say to Mr. Senko, I think Belarus have been very active, and I think I commend them for the number of amendments that you've had down to the draft resolution, and it shows you've taken it very seriously. And for that reason, I'm sorry that once again I'm actually opposing your amendment. It would certainly fly in the face of the Monaco Declaration last year, which was clear in relation to this issue. So for that reason, I'm opposing the amendment.
And now I put the amendment to the vote. Those who vote in favor, please raise your cards. Against? Abstentions? Okay, the amendment is defeated. And now I proceed to amendment 51, and I call Mr. Dolidze for Georgia to propose this amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do believe that OSCE mission has to reopen in Georgia. I mean, in Belarus as well, that's why we mentioned both countries here, and to monitor the situation, particularly it should be kind of watchdog on democratic development of the countries. And we are more than open on that, you know, as I mentioned. There is still mission, OSCE trial mission on the ground who is watching on that. But frankly speaking, after the decision of 48, I don't know, does it have any sense? Because you are not expecting for the verdict, you are not expecting for the report of OSCE trial mission, including Hammerberg, And regarding the Vano Merabishvili, who has done, I don't want to talk about him in details, during last 9 years, you're gonna, call him as a political prisoner or whatever. This is not fair, and this is double standards from my point of view, because the rule of law and justice is totally different. So I don't know, frankly speaking now, you will support this reopening of mission or not, but I don't know whether it's important or not, because you are not waiting for the monitoring and for the final report of your own mission on the ground. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 51? No. Mr. Walsh, please.
Mr. Dalitz, your amendment is conforming with the Monaco Declaration, and your addition that Georgia clearly prescribing principles of territorial integrity of participating states. As somebody who comes from a country which has had their territorial integrity infringed for over 800 years now, I'm very glad to support your amendment.
And now we are almost finished. Okay. I put now the Amendment 51 to the vote. Please vote in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. The Amendment 51 is adopted. That concludes the discussion of amendments. Thank you all. I propose that we now formally move to the vote on the draft resolution as amended. Will those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise their cards voting? Yes, you must count again. Okay?
Ask them to keep it up. Ask them to keep that up.
Keep it up.
She's got 41. 42. 42.
42 in favor. Those against, please raise your card. Two against. Abstentions? Please raise your card. 2 abstentions. The draft resolution is adopted. We will now turn to consideration to the supplementary items. We will take supplementary items in the order in which they are set on the agenda. We will consider the remaining supplementary items during our meeting tomorrow. But now we start with the first supplementary item. We will consider the draft resolution on strengthening civil society institutions on the OSCE sponsored by Mr. Azai Guliev of Azerbaijan. I call Mr. Guliev to introduce the draft resolution. Mr. Guliev, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank to all of my colleagues who put his or her signature on the draft resolutions and supported it. And I also would like to thank to the member of the Standing Committee for supporting and including to the agenda. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the main purpose of the resolution is, as it is obvious from its name, to promote and strengthen civil society institutions in the OSCE region. Today, civil society institutions play a vital role providing assistance to the promotion of democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And I believe states have obligations to create a legal environment where civil society institutions could function freely and contribute to the promotion of these values. The resolution calls on the participating states to eliminate any type of restrictions on access to information resources by civil society institutions, to engage in dialogue in the decision-making process, as well as in the process of solving social problems with NGOs and other active civil society institutions, to promote the exchange of information and practices for increased collaboration between civil society institutions, to cooperate with non-governmental organizations and other civil society institutions on the resolution and prevention of regional conflicts, to grant consultative status to non-governmental organizations in the appropriate OSCE institutions. The resolution also recommends the participating states to create and develop appropriate mechanisms to mediate and facilitate collaboration between civil society institutions and the state, and to improve the legal environment that allows for greater performance of non-governmental organizations and civil society institutions. Besides this, it also encourages the participating states to create an enabling environment to ensure sustainability of activities and transparency of financial resources of non-governmental organizations, and to engage closely with non-governmental organizations in programs and projects that have social importance. Dear colleagues, I hope for your support, and I think that it will be one of the possible tools for the OECPA to make sure that the civil society organizations, as well as the other actors, are acting free and democratically, and they really is supported by international community. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Guliev. Thank you. And now we open debate about this draft resolution. The debate is open, and anybody wish to speak? Inscriptions? Nobody wish to speak. I think debate needs finished. And we are moving to amendments to this resolution. Have been tabled 4 amendments, and I shall allow to the proposers of amendments to speak for a maximum of 1 minute. I shall then allow the same time to an opponent of the amendment, and I shall then ask the sponsor of the draft resolution for his opinion before putting the amendment to the vote. I call Mrs. Fry of Canada to propose Amendment 1.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The reason I added the word participate in this amendment is because I felt that we know that rule of law alone is not just enough, that having a piece of legislation doesn't guarantee participation. It doesn't guarantee action. It doesn't guarantee reality. It just says we all think this is a great piece of law, but it doesn't really trickle down to the real people. And I think it's really important for civil society not only to be supported by law, but to be given the resources that they need. In other words, the ability to participate needs resources. It requires support from governmental bodies. It requires the ability of the society to perform, and to perform it must be given resources in order for it to participate at the end of the day. So I wanted to put a little more teeth into this resolution, into this item. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We have a problem, Mrs. Fry. You talk about the Amendment 2, and we are discussing the Amendment 1. I don't know if you want to speak with us something about Amendment 1, as you are the sponsor.
Yeah. Yes, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I just, to replace paragraph 7, which calls upon participating states to ease restrictions on access, I think we should replace the words with to eliminate restrictions on access, not simply to ease it, but to actually make it happen. To ease it takes a long time. To eliminate it means it happens right away. I wanted to put, again, some strength and teeth into that amendment. Sorry, Madam Chair, for talking to the wrong amendment earlier on.
To speak against, I think we can do discussion for Amendment 1 and 2 together, and we put to the vote separately because we have this confusion. Does anyone want to speak against Amendment 1 or against Amendment 2 or against both amendments at the same time? Anyone wants to speak against? Okay. Mr. Guliev, your opinion about these two amendments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very grateful to Madam Frey for her contribution. I have no objection. I think it should be and might be accepted. Thank you.
You accepted two amendments?
Yes, I put my signatures already. I am supportive. Thank you.
I don't have. Okay, very well. Now I put the Amendment 1 to the vote. Please, attention. Votes against, in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. The Amendment 1 is adopted. And now I put to the vote the Amendment 2. Votes in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. The Amendment 2 is adopted. And now we are going to Amendment 3, and sponsor is is here. I call Mr. Tseratelli of Georgia to propose Amendment 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, so as far as paragraph 13, also includes term regional conflicts, and the main content is that. So we're suggesting to amend this and to put some additional words here based on Helsinki Final Act and relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the Amendment 3? No one? Mr. Guliev, your opinion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also like to thank Mr. Sreteli for his really good suggestions. I think this suggestion and this amendment fully describes the legal framework of the conflict settlements, and so I don't have any objection. I accept it. Thank you.
Okay, I put the Amendment 3 to the vote. Votes in favor, please. Votes against? Abstentions? The Amendment 3 is adopted. Amendment 4, and I call Mrs. Fry of Canada to propose this amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I added the words including access to both foreign and domestic sources of funding because today many civil society groups do not only exist in one country, especially environmental groups and other human rights groups. They cross global boundaries, and therefore they may have access to funding from other countries, both foreign assets and others. And therefore, if you're going to allow for them to be able to function, you have to include access to all funding, but then also transparency and disclosure of all funding.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the Amendment 4? No one. Mr. Guliev, please, your opinion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of course, indeed, I fully agree with Madam Frey for this contribution and with that suggestion. It is really true that today's NGO society is really facing with the sustainability of development, with the financial sustainability, and this is why diversification of the financial resources is much more important and has the vital significance. This is why this is also important that the national NGOs have to have the equal rights or access to both resources, national and international. This is why I think it sounds quite logical, and I agree and accept this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Guliev. And now I put this amendment, Amendment 4, to the vote. Please vote. What? You have the floor? Yes. I give you the floor.
Если бы не возражали, мы предлагаем добавить в пункт 14 в соответствии с национальным законодательством. Спасибо.
But if you want that, you must present in the regulamentary time an amendment, and you don't do that. I cannot accept your suggestion because you don't do in the right time. Excuse me. Now we are going to vote. Okay? Please vote in favor. Votes against? Abstentions? The amendment is adopted. That concludes the discussion of amendments. Thank you. And I propose that we now formally move to a vote on the draft resolution as amended. Will those in favor of adopting the draft resolution please raise your cards? Those who vote against? Abstentions? The draft. What?
4 abstentions.
4 abstentions. The draft resolution is adopted. I don't know what time it is.
Finish for today. We start tomorrow
Yes.
with Belarus.
Okay. We will end the meeting without considering the remaining supplementary items. The meeting is now closed. We meet again at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And we will now turn to... Okay. Okay. We start with the draft resolution on Belarus. Okay. Thank you.
When was the last time you embarked on a journey to change the world? When was the last time you tried to bring people together around an idea? Here's my story. Is it possible to leave a better world for coming generations? To work for people from countries you never heard of. To make thousands